Hey everybody, today we are looking at the fantastic Let's Groove riff played by Verdine White of Earth, Wind & Fire. This riff is so much fun to play. On one hand, it's really straightforward and simple. On the other hand, if you want to play it perfectly, there's some tricky little details in there. So this one's going to be good for beginners all the way up to more advanced players. Before we get into it, just a heads up, I'm using a 5-string bass here. If you're playing a 4-string, you don't have this low B string. This E string is going to be your lowest string. So this is the way I like to do the left-hand fingering on this riff. Open, first finger, fourth finger, second finger, first finger, first, open, first. You do have a couple options there, so I'm going to walk you through what those options are, and then I'll explain why I like that particular fingering. Okay, so first option is which finger to use on the second note of the riff. Do you use first finger or second finger? I use my first finger because it's a lot easier for me to get my fourth finger where I want it if I'm leading with my first finger than it is if I'm using my second finger for that riff and I have to really stretch. I do use my second finger when I come back down because I then have to have my first finger available for the F sharp. But if it's easier for you to just think third fret equals second finger, that's totally fine. The other option is where to play this note. I'm playing it on the 5th fret of the E string. You can also play it on the open A string. I think it's easier for muting purposes and for a couple right hand reasons that we'll get to in the right hand technique section. I think it's easier to play it on the E string than it is on the open A string. But again, if you want to play it on the open A string, that's totally fine as well. The right hand technique is where the trickiness comes in. So we're going to go over a more beginner friendly option, and then we'll look at a more advanced option after that. Even for you beginners though, there's still going to be plenty of work to do with this. There's still lots of stuff to think about with right hand technique. And right off the bat on beat 2, we have a rest, and we're going to use our right hand to mute the string to do that rest. So leading with our index finger, we're going to bring our middle finger down onto the E string to mute the string so we can do the rest. And then right after that, we have a staccato note on the G. Staccato means short with a little bit of silence after it. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to play this note with our middle finger and then mute with our index finger, except for this time our index finger is going to follow almost immediately after we play the note. So very short. Play the note and then almost immediately mute it. So those first two notes together. And now you can see we're in position to play the next note on the E string, right? Our index finger is touching the E string. Super easy to just follow through for that next note. That's one of the reasons why I like to play the A on the E string as opposed to the open A string, like we talked about earlier. If we played it on the A string, we'd have to pick up our finger and move it over rather than just following through. So we're on the A with our index finger, and then we're just going to alternate for the next couple notes. Middle, index. And now we have another rest after this F sharp. This time, however, we're going to use our left hand to mute the string as opposed to our right hand. The reason for that is that if we used our right hand to mute the note, that's going to put us in position to play the next note on the same string, just like we saw a second ago. Except for this time, our next note isn't on the same string. Our next note is on the A string, so we don't want to be in position to play this next note on the E string. So we can do that. There is an option to use our right hand to mute there, and we'll talk about that in a second. But for now, it's going to be easier to use our left hand to mute this F sharp. And the way we're going to do that is to just release the pressure, but keep your finger on the string. If you pick your finger all the way up off the string, you'll get open string ringing out. We don't want that. That's not actually a rest. You still have a note ringing out. So we want nice silent rest. So make sure your finger stays touching the string after you release the pressure. Then you can slide it up over onto the A string. We're going to use our middle finger to play this next note. And then the next note, the open A string, that's another staccato note. So we're going to use our staccato technique, except for this time, we're going to play the note with our index and mute with our middle, which puts us playing the last note with our middle finger. One last thing to note about this riff in terms of right hand technique. If you use the fingering we just went over, you are going to be you're going to be leading with the opposite right hand finger every time you come back around to the first note. So if you're repeating this riff over and over again, and you start the first repetition leading with your index finger, on the second repetition, when you come back to that first note, you're going to be on your middle finger. So you're not only going to have to learn it just the way we just did it with using specific fingers for specific notes, you're going to have to learn it the opposite way as well. All right, and the only difference between the beginner version and the more advanced version is how we're going about muting this F sharp. For the beginner version, we used our left hand. For the more advanced version, we're going to use our right hand. And the reason is left hand mutes always have a little bit of fret buzz at the end. And right hand mutes don't. They're a lot cleaner sounding. So I prefer, whenever I can, to use my right hand to mute notes. So we have a couple options for how to do that. If we're starting the riff with our index finger, that's going to put us playing this F sharp with our index finger. So we could just mute that F sharp with our middle finger, bring our index finger up here, play the next note, we're all good. That's a totally legitimate way to do it. But it kind of bugs me because it puts us playing two notes in a row with our index finger, and that just feels weird to me. I don't like the way that feels. I always like to alternate unless I'm raking. So what I like to do is I actually like to enlist my ring finger. It's not doing anything anyway. I like to enlist my ring finger to do the mute, and that allows me to keep alternating between my two playing fingers. So this is what it looks like in slow motion. Play with the index, mute with the ring, play the next note with my middle. This is what it looks like in the context of the riff. So I like the way that feels a lot more. If you've never done any muting with your ring finger, that's probably going to feel really awkward, and it's going to take a while to get that to feel right and to work right. But if you want more options with your right hand with muting, I'd recommend learning that technique because it really does open up a lot of possibilities for you. So the key of this song is E minor. The scale pattern that we're using is going to depend on where we're playing that A that we talked about earlier in the left-hand technique section. If we're playing the A just on the open A string, our scale pattern is going to be a pretty straightforward first finger minor scale pattern starting on the open E. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. If we're playing our A here, this A is going to come from a different scale pattern because it's outside of the bounds of that first finger pattern that I just played. This one is going to come from a fourth finger pattern starting here. Now if you're playing a 4th string, you're not going to have this note, but you'll have all the other notes in this scale pattern. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. The scale degrees that we're using in this riff are 1, 3, 4, 3, 2, 5, 4, 5. And for the names of the notes, we have E, G, A, G, F sharp, B, A, and B. This song starts out around 125, and once the song gets going a little bit, creeps up to maybe like 127-ish. That's pretty normal for older songs that were recorded back before everybody recorded to a click. You'd have that human element of speeding up just a tiny bit as the energy of the song increased. The takeaway from this bass line for me is really, it's just all about groove. It's such a simple line, but it's played so well. There's nothing flashy going on, but you do have those really subtle rhythmic elements that really set it apart. You can take something really simple and super repetitive and really just focus on playing it as well as you possibly can. That's worth so much more than taking something super complicated and just hoping to get through it.